Okay, The Prince Warriors and the Swords of Rima, Volume 3, Chapter 12, Fact or Fiction. Manuel rode with his father to the high school where the latest sky pod had been found. He was relieved his father had allowed him to come along. "They will think you're too young, so I will tell them you are my assistant," said Mr. Santos. He seemed more like his old self, laughing and even joking with Manuel. For the first time in a long time, he was really excited about something. Manuel held half a dozen field manuals in his lap that his father had insisted he bring along. Mr. Santos did not care much for computers or other newfangled gadgets, as he referred to them. He loved his dusty old books. Manuel opened the top book and glanced through it. His father's writing was everywhere. Notes in the margins, cross-outs where he had rewritten the sentence or description under a picture. Obviously, Mr. Santos didn't agree with the author of the book on a few things. Manuel noticed the book in question dealt with meteorites and other space rocks. "Do you think it's a meteorite?" he asked his father. "It does not look like any I have seen," Mr. Santos said as he drove. "A meteorite of that size would have created a huge crater in the earth upon landing, but the rock is just resting on the ground." The largest meteorite ever found on Earth was 9 feet long and weighed 66 tons. This one is 20 times that size at least. How could it just have fallen to the ground without creating a crater? I do not understand. "Maybe it's a porous rock," Manuel suggested. "That would be much lighter." "Impossible," said Mr. Santos, "unless it came from a volcano, and the nearest volcano is 200 miles away." "You're right," said Manuel. It had been a long time since he and his father had had a conversation like this. Manuel missed that. They used to talk about rocks all the time. From the time Manuel could walk, his father took him on mineral and geode hunts all over the country. They even went gold prospecting once. Mr. Santos taught Manuel how to spot veins of gold and silver and granite, how to tell different types of quartz. If his mother was with them, she would talk about the plants they saw along the way and how some plants could actually grow inside the tiniest cracks in rocks. Sometimes they stayed out for so long that Manuel would complain that he was hot or tired and wanted to leave. Now he wished he could go back, just once more. Mr. Santos had to park pretty far away because the whole block was jammed with government vehicles, news vans, and police cars. The police had set up a cordon to keep curious onlookers away from the mysterious rock. A very tall fence made of plastic had been erected around the whole site, although the pod was so huge that most of it was still plainly visible. Mr. Santos pulled into a convenience store parking lot and grabbed his bag of tools, hammers, chisels, and a Geiger counter. He exited the car and hurried over to the high school. Manuel, carrying the books, struggled to keep up. A policeman stopped them at the yellow tape line. "I'm sorry, sir, this site is off limits." "My name is Aaron Santos. I am a geologist. I was called here to examine the specimen." "Okay, just a minute, I'll check," said the cop. He turned away and clicked on his shoulder radio, talking for a minute and listening to the response. Finally, he turned back. "Someone's coming to get you," he said. A minute later, an older man in an official-looking jacket came running over to the taped line. "Ah, Mr. Santos," he said, waving a clipboard around like it was a conductor's baton. "Thank you for coming. Come through, please. Let him through." Mr. Santos and Manuel ducked under the yellow tape and entered the enclosure. Manuel suddenly felt very important to be inside where the action was. "I am Joseph Vaughn," said the man with much excitement. "We spoke on the phone." He shook Mr. Santos' hand vigorously. He was much shorter than Manuel's father, with a thick mustache and bushy eyebrows that wiggled around like frantic caterpillars. "This is my son Manuel," said Mr. Santos. "He's quite a good scientist himself." Manuel beamed up at the man, pleased his father had complimented him. He didn't do that very often. "How do you do?" "Nice to meet you, Manuel. That is a lot of books you're carrying." "Yes, sir." Mr. Vaughn gave him an indulgent smile and turned back to his father. "Mr. Santos, we have determined that the specimen is not radioactive. We've had 0 readings on our Geiger counters, nor can we find any evidence of a biohazard threat. But we still know nothing of its composition. We need you to tell us if it is indeed extraterrestrial. As a precaution, we will have you put on a hazmat suit. Perhaps your son should wait here." "Please let me come," said Manuel, fearful that he would be left behind. "I can wear a suit too. Please, Papa?" Fine, said Mr. Santos. "It will be a good experience." Another official brought hazmat suits for Manuel and his father. Manuel set the books down so he could put on the suit. He decided to leave the books behind as they proceeded inside the plastic fencing. They were getting a little too heavy anyway. There was the rock, the sky pod, standing before them. Manuel had never seen one up close before. It was so much bigger than it looked when it was actually in the sky over Hortus. Mr. Santos approached the rock with caution and ran his hand over the surface. It was lumpy, but overlain with a smooth coating. It reminded Manuel of a peanut butter ball dipped in chocolate, like the ones his mama used to make. Mr. Santos opened his bag of tools and took out a chisel and a hammer. He set the chisel against the rock and hit it with his hammer several times, but he could not even make a dent in it. Extremely dense, which is consistent with a meteorite, he said, talking mostly to himself. The surface is smooth, almost shiny, caused by the outer layer melting when it comes through the atmosphere. "So it is a space rock?" said Mr. Van hopefully. "I can't say for sure yet. We must discern the composition. All meteorites contain massive amounts of iron." Mr. Santos pulled a large magnet from his bag and held it to the rock, but the magnet was not attracted at all. No attraction. Therefore, no iron. Mr. Santos said, his eyebrows knitted together. "Very strange. I would suggest taking a core sample." "You mean drill into it?" Manuel whirled around to his father. "No, don't do that. Manuel, do not interfere." "No, Papa, seriously, don't drill into that rock." Mr. Santos looked at his son curiously. "Why not?" "Because it might be dangerous. There might be something dangerous inside." Manuel felt the panic rise up in his throat, remembering what he knew about the sky pods being filled with ints. "Nothing organic could possibly survive inside a solid rock," said Mr. Santos. "You should know that, Manuel." "What if it isn't solid? What if it's hollow, like a geode? That would explain its apparent lightness." "You know as well as I do, Manuel, that meteorites are far denser than Earth rock," said Mr. Santos, with a growing edge in his voice. "This rock definitely came through an atmospheric barrier. It is not of this Earth." Manuel struggled for some other excuse to delay this operation. "But you would need a very powerful drill. This rock is too hard for an ordinary drill." "Yes, we will need some very heavy-duty drilling equipment, but there are companies that specialize in such things, like the drill that was used to free those men trapped in the collapsed mine a few years ago." "Oh, yes, I remember that story," said Mr. Vaughn. "Quite remarkable. I will make inquiries." "I doubt that there are any in this area, Manuel said. Mr. Santos ignored him. "Check with the local quarries. They may have a truck-mounted drill available. They would need at least a 5-inch drill bit, bigger if you can find one." Mr. Vaughn pulled out his cell phone and began talking into it. "We need to get a drill as big as you can find." Mr. Santos left the area and returned to the place where they had put on the hazmat suits. After they had taken them off, Manuel picked up the pile of books and followed his father back to the car, all the while wondering what to do now. Ruach, please help me. He knew that somehow Ruach would hear his unspoken plea. Papa, can I talk to you about something? He said finally. Mr. Santos turned to look at him, a trace of annoyance in his face. What now? That rock. Haven't you seen it somewhere before? Seen it somewhere? In one of my books, you mean? He pointed to the pile of books Manuel held. No, not these. In the Prince Warrior book. Mr. Santos said nothing, a strange look spreading across his face. Papa, it's a sky pod from a Hortus. Manuel could not tell exactly what his father was thinking, but he knew his father understood what he was talking about. Nonsense, Mr. Santos said, turning away. All that is nonsense. Fairy tales. Your mother... What about my mama? Manuel said. She told you, didn't she? Mr. Santos paused at a loss for words, then he quickly walked to the car without answering. As soon as he got home, Manuel texted Evan and Xavier to tell them what his father was planning to do with the skypod. Xavier, who must have had the phone that the two brothers shared, replied back immediately, We cannot let that happen. Manuel knew this, but how could he stop it from happening? Could he go up against his own father, let alone a government agency? Manuel thought about his father's reaction at the mention of the name Ahoritas. There had been disgust in his eyes, but fear as well. His father was a good man. He was very smart, yet he had changed the Prince Warrior book, made corrections to it. Mr. Santos didn't believe in the Prince Warrior book. He thought it was a fairy tale. He didn't believe in Ahoritas either, even though he knew all about it. How could he know and not believe? Manuel loved science more than anything. He loved forming a hypothesis and working toward proving it by the scientific method. He loved rational explanations for things that made sense according to the laws of nature. And yet he had been to Ahoritas. He had seen things he could never explain with science alone. A tiny seed that stopped the destruction of the terrible flaming Olathron, water that led to a dry, mysterious cave, boots that sprouted spikes, a mountain that breathed. Ruach himself, a smallish, otherworldly being who had given Manuel and his friends purpose and courage and power. Ahoritas was a real place, and the enemy was real too. But Manuel's father dismissed this power as a fantasy, perhaps because it had failed to save his mother. Manuel pulled his Prince Warrior book from the shelf and opened it. He looked through the gilded pages, marveling at the beautiful illustrations. He wondered why his mama had died. She had been sick for a long time, but couldn't the power of the source, the power that had stopped the Olathron and the Ents, and the wisdom of Ruach have stopped her sickness too? Suddenly his phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out, surprised to see the Unseen app already opened with a message on the screen. Lean not on your own understanding. It was as if Ruach had heard his question, even though Manuel hadn't spoken out loud. He felt a certain peace in the words, despite the fact that his heart still ached for his mama and for his papa too. If only I could help my papa, Manuel whispered aloud. A voice in his head whispered back to him, You will. You know, the last couple days I've been having questions too. My husband died on Halloween. The old storyteller died on Halloween in 2021. And I had been praying and asking God to please heal him. And he didn't. And I didn't understand. And I was pretty upset for a good while. And then yesterday I took some people a meal on my way to church. And there was this elderly man, and he was taking care of his wife who's laying there in bed and can't get up on her own. And she can't talk, and she can just move her eyes. And that elderly man was so excited to see his wife, that she was able to open her eyes and that he had her for one more day. And I questioned God again then, and was really, why couldn't I have the old storyteller for one more day? But even then, this scripture came to my mind. This lean not to your own understanding, and the one that all things work together for the good to them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. I don't know what you're going through, but I do know that he's with you. Try to lean not to your understanding, and trust God that he's got you, even when it feels like you're all alone and there's nobody there. I don't know why I'm saying all this. All I'm supposed to be doing is reading a book, but oh well. We'll go on to chapter 13 tomorrow. Talk to you later.